Welcome to the Magdalene Codes. I'm your host, Valeria Marie Tinini, and today's show will be covering Before Getting Pregnant, Becoming Fertile the Conscious Way. We are entering a paradigm of women who are struggling to get pregnant or are having a difficult time in their pregnancy. But we're also entering a new paradigm shift to heal and activate deeper union with the pure self, in which will allow for great transformation for women and the women who carry and birth the new humanity onto the planet. We need not longer to unconsciously birth a baby into this world. Our guest today speaks of ancient wisdom brought down directly to her by the goddess Isis, so that she can write a book and share with us this great ancient wisdom that we are to herald today.
Hi, this is Chelsea Wiley. Thanks for having me, Val. I'm really excited to be on your show.
Yeah.
I am here because I just finished writing my second book, Fertile, and I want women all over the planet to have access to this information, which was provided to me from the goddess Isis through the line of the Magdalene and provided to me on a long journey that I've taken over the last 2 to 3 years, but really started 7 to 8 years ago in 2012, but was amplified around 2017 and completely accelerated when I moved to Europe. And the book provides a lot of information on how to bring conscious and enlightened and magnificent children to the earth in the ancient ways that we used to do it. And I made it really, really practical. So I made it really easy for any woman to understand, but there will be specific women on this earth who will understand the way of the rose. And almost, it's a coded information for those women that have, experienced certain accelerated awakenings that they'll know, oh, this is focused for me. And anyone will benefit, but so I'm here to talk about that, and I'm really excited to share some information.
Yes, I'm really excited to pick your brain a bit because I know a lot of women are having, first of all, a difficult time having children. That's a big one right now, and then the second thing is a lot of people are having autistic children, and or children that are on the spectrum. And so I think this is also something that, to me, like something that you're talking about feels very ancient and something that I feel a very strong connection to the Greco-Roman time.
Well, it's connected. It's very connected. You probably had a past life in the divine birth under, there was 2 different cults there. And we can talk about that. That's off of the Magdalene, but it's the same. It's very much part of the story. There's the Essene community who brought children. I mean, this wasn't a part of the book, but I've done my own research and my own flashback memories, but I've had lives both in the Essene community and within Greece, within the birthing. And they had different ways of doing it as far as I understand. I don't know the specifics of that, but I just know that they did not birth the same, they did not bring children down in the same way.
So let's go back. Let's go way back with you. What was your connection to Isis, and what you said she came to you? How did she come to you?
Yeah. So first off, I should say that I have a really high spiritual connection, and I'm on this path, but then I'm also connected to Western medicine. So I work as a practitioner, as a nurse practitioner within a fertility clinic, helping women to, become more fertile within a clinic, but also with this ancient knowledge. So my hope is that it's accessible to everybody. But my background, this all started as one night I was with a teacher, and on the phone, Isis began to channel through her. And I didn't know the teacher as well as I do now. She's now one of my very best friends. And Isis says, we will open your third eye on a full moon ceremony. And she goes, and I said, well, that's me. Do you mean you want me to come over to your house for a full moon ceremony? And she said, yes, I think you should come over. And I said, okay. And then I looked at the calendar in a couple of days, and it was going to be a full moon that Thursday. So I called her and I said, it's a Cancer full moon this Thursday. I think I should come to your house. She goes, great. So I showed up at her house, and I'd never been there. And I walked in the door. She had created a ceremony, and I had really never been a part of ceremony, and I didn't understand it. But
how old were you?
What?
Just to give time frame, how old were you?
This was 2017, just 2 years ago.
Oh,
I had never been part of that kind of a ceremony, and it opened me up. So to make it short, we called in Isis. The walls were basically shaking. The room began to completely transform. The lights went off and on, and she walked in form. And I felt her touch me, and I felt her enter my body, and I began to be, and that moment in time, it was a split second between becoming clairvoyant and clairaudient to never even understanding what that meant. And so while I held my teacher's hand, the goddess Isis began to take me into the higher dimensions. And the only reason I knew what was going on is because I had a human, my teacher Celestine Starr, in the room holding my hand while I was floating up through these dimensions. And I began to see all of these ascended masters. And I didn't have any, I went from not understanding the dimensions to being a part of them within a 5-hour experience that shifted my life forever. And I saw a lot of things. I actually saw the future. I saw myself in India. I saw these different temples I would see, but I didn't know it until I actually went to the temples and began to activate myself at certain places as I was writing the book Fertile. So she asked me in these higher dimensions, she gave me a scroll, and she asked me to put the scroll across my forehead, which is actually written about in the Bible under Ezekiel. He receives a scroll and he opens it up and he opens it and reads it through his forehead. So a lot of times they provide information that way. New to me, I'm always innocent.
You're reading through your third eye.
Yes. And at that time, I didn't, every spiritual experience I've ever had, I went into it completely empty-minded and innocent of what was going on.
I love that about you.
Yeah. And I never had a book or anything about it. Like later in life, experiencing the hero's comas, I had never even heard of it.
Exactly.
And so everything I've ever experienced I've never heard of it before. And so it wasn't until later. So while I was in these higher dimensions, what I understand is the 7th dimension, she asked me to write a book for her. And Celestine, being in her right mind, said, give her 3 symbols to write this book so she can begin, the process. And she gave me a square, a triangle, and a circle. And then I came back down, and then my life shifted, and I was asked to move to Ireland. In the physical body, in the physical world, my ex-husband at the time, or my ex-husband now, was asked to transfer his company to Ireland. And I said, let's do it. Let's move. And I didn't know then, but I began to move into the realm of the goddess. And while in Ireland, I took every opportunity, and I did the entire rose ley line while I was writing Fertile. And because my third eye was open, because of this ceremony, which with Isis, that was about 5 hours, completely opened me. And I became clairvoyant, clairaudient. I began to do healings. I began to do readings. I began to have information flow through me. And I started to test women that I was like teaching yoga to. And then it just amplified into becoming a business, actually, where I help women all over the world consciously conceive, and they find me and they get a lot of help. So after moving, ask a couple questions because there's such a long story, but I can go into, what is the rose ley line?
Yes.
How did this happen? How did I meet Magdalene? And then how was I guided to do all this, which was all Isis is the Magdalene energy. And,
Yes. So it's some people know and some people don't know, but Mary Magdalene is the reincarnate of the Isis energy, or Isis herself. And so that's why it's connected. And that's the same lineage. It's the same divine mother coming through. And so, you know, I'm not surprised that the divine mother came to you to bring down these codes, to bring down this new, which is also ancient, but new to our generation. But I feel like as soon as people will flip through the pages, they will feel a deep resonance and a remembrance. And I also feel like it's an awakening kind of book.
It is.
Yeah. So it's going to shift people's consciousness and but also bring in new codes to their womb, I feel.
Yes. And I'd love to talk about what the square, the triangle, and the circle mean, and then how it all unfolded, because it was magical, and it's something I can tell in a 10-minute story, but it really was a 1.5 year journey. So I moved to Ireland and I wrote my first book, Mystical Motherhood, which is just a simplified version of ancient yogic ways in Western medicine of conscious conception and pregnancy and birth. And then I began to write my second book, Fertile, which is what we're here talking about. And it started, I was in the Himalayas, and I was at the Dalai Lama's temple, and I began to pray. I was hanging some prayer flags, and I had a taxi waiting for me because I was going home to my children. I had to leave this trip early. And I was praying at the Dalai Lama's temple. I said, help me to awaken humanity. Help me to awaken humanity. And in that moment, I received a gift in my phone of 46 photos that eventually turned into 48 photos. And as I found out over a period of 9 months, those 46 photos was a representation of DNA. And so what Fertile is about is to help to change the DNA of the children, or make women capable containers and vessels to hold a higher frequency DNA on the planet as we move into the 48 chromosomes, which will be the future of humanity. And I did this in a way of explaining how do you shift DNA. And what we know is that behavioral epigenetics is proving that DNA can switch and it can flip by thoughts, behaviors, environment, food, and emotions. So research began to unfold for me. And it started by the only time I've ever spoken to Thoth. He came to me and he was the first person who said, now you will start to write your book and you will get information on DNA. And that's all he said. And this is after I received the 46 photos inserted into my phone in the Himalayas. And I began to do research on DNA. And I didn't know anything about DNA. And now that's all actually I do in my job, is I work with DNA. But I was guided to first start my journey in Mary Magdalene's land in France. And I went to Mary Magdalene's land and I was by myself driving around, finding everything on my own. I found the cave on my own, and I drove to the pentagram on my own. And I didn't know at the time, but Mary Magdalene's land contains the shapes, the sacred geometry that is basically the template of the DNA that the goddess Isis created after the fall of Atlantis. So while there, I never know what's happening. I just allow things to sink in. I try not to think about it, but that's where I began to write Fertile. Later, I went to Scotland, to Rosslyn Chapel. I also spent a lot of time writing in Glastonbury, and I spent some time writing in Egypt. So I hit all the major lines. If anyone doesn't know what this is, there's some major activation points at these locations. I believe even one down to Cairo, but that hold the Magdalene energy. And while I'm going to these places, I was actually innocent to that information. I was just guided to go to these places multiple times. And when I'm guided to go somewhere, I listen. After I went to Magdalene's land, I was gifted a book by my teacher, Celestine. She randomly came to visit me, which was actually, she was guided by Isis to come. She was the woman who helped to open my third eye while I was in California before I had moved to Ireland. And she gifted me a book called The Revelations by David Wood, which I actually gave to Val too. And in that book, was, and she didn't know I was writing. She didn't know I was in the middle. She didn't consciously know what I was writing. I just receive what I need to receive as I'm needing to download it and provide it for other women. So it held the square, the circle, and the triangle. And so what it says is this Magdalene land is there's a template of what the sacred child is. It's within the womb, which is also known as, you know, the what's the Solomon's temple, or
Solomon's temple.
yeah. So there's the rectangle, and then there's the Vesica Pisces, which is the circle, and within that there's the Merkaba and the pentagram. Mm-hmm. So within all of these shapes, you can imagine that the square that's holding within the womb is the actual square they gave me. Then there's the two circles, which is the Vesica Pisces, and then the triangles are made up of the pentagram and the Merkaba. So what David Wood found is that when the fall of Atlantis occurred, everything, the entire humanity was wiped out and all information was lost. And so in order to bring back humanity, this is a belief, you can believe it or not, but it's a belief system around how humanity was created, but it was from the goddess. And so she was the genetic engineer of humanity, and she helped to create the birthing chambers. And so she left the way of how to do that within the land of France, which was protected by the Cathars and by the Knights of Templar. So they created special rocks and formations that kept this actual signature, which is actually found in the Solomon's temple and in other temples around the earth. So if we know that inside the womb, there's two shapes, there's the pentagram and there's the Merkaba. And the Merkaba is a representation of God, and the pentagram is the representation of a beast. And so what Isis essentially created was a body of a beast with the capability to connect to the mind of God without any skills to do so. So she made a humanity ahead of its time. She made a humanity, she's from Sirius, yeah. And she made humanity with this mind that connect to God, to connect to Sirius, to connect back home, but didn't leave any skills for humanity to do so. Mm-hmm. Right? So this is what the 46 chromosomes is based off of. Mm-hmm.
So are you saying that she she left humanity with a bit of like a mystery to kind of unravel?
Left humanity with a mystery unravel. And she left, so the goddess Isis is the mother. She's the birther, and she comes from the Hathor lineage. Yes. And of course, her incarnations and her priestesses were Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene, and we can go through the Magdalenes and this long line of women that's also connected into Greece and then connected into the Essene communities and throughout the whole world. Mm-hmm. Lost in history, this ancient knowledge. Mm-hmm. So what we know from this land in France, which is still held, and what this man did, the reason he even found it is he took his whole entire life to map this land out. He had to use planes and mapping systems. So he did it from intuition, but he did it with the help of science. Yeah. And so we know that we don't want this DNA anymore. And we know that if she's a genetic engineer, we know that all women can be genetic engineers, because we are just in essence a replication of the goddess. So in my book Fertile, which will be out this summer 2019, I teach women how to become conscious genetic engineers of their children, so that they can be capable of conceiving and birthing an entirely new type of child onto the planet.
So exciting.
It's so exciting because I make it as complicated as you can understand, but I also simplify it so that any woman can do it just by changing simple things in their life.
So let me ask you, is this like a step-by-step, kind of way of doing it, or is it more like metaphorical? How did you explain this process?
Like the goddess Isis wrote this entire book along with other ascended masters. As I was saying before, I had to reread it, and I saw the brilliance only in rereading it, because I wrote it as I was moving. I wrote it as I was listening. I wrote it as I was seeing. And it's brilliant. And I'm going to explain how it was broken down as easy as it's very complicated to do so, but I will as best I can. So I broke it down to the square. So how do we get, so we back to this land in France. So we know there's a Merkaba and we know there's a pentagram. And I believe that if we switch the pentagram into the octagon, which is the star of Isis, which also represents the sacred geometry of the rose, that's the key to creating this 48 chromosomes enlightened child. So it's basically like shifting, and that's what geometry is just DNA. It's just a frequency. It's just a harmonics. It's a light. Mm-hmm. And so all of these really, really high spiritual processes, which a lot of women who are listening to this can highly identify with, which I'll go through the basic things, and I'll also go through this, the specifics of this high energy. Mm-hmm. So I broke the book down into what she gave me: the square, the circle, or the square, the triangle, and the circle, to make it easy for anyone to read. So the square is the body, the triangle is the mind, connecting back to the mind of God, and the circle is connecting back to spirit. And I know, as with my Western knowledge, food. So I also broke it down into what behavioral epigenetics is saying about changing DNA. And I got to work with Dr. Bruce Lipton, who wrote this famous book called The Biology of Belief, and integrate some of his scientific findings. And so what we know about DNA right now is that DNA is programmable. And everything you think, feel, say, do, anything that's in your environment, any of your emotions and thoughts, all are what program your DNA. Basically, something like 1% of your DNA is actually really given to you by your parents. It's what happens in your consciousness that turns DNA on or not. And so what I know from studying psychology and studying birth and studying all, developmental theories throughout school is that there's no developmental theories that start in conception. And so all developmental theories by Piaget or Freud or anyone, it all starts at birth. But that doesn't make any sense, because motherhood, the most important part of motherhood, is actually at the time of conception, even before that. Because what we know from science is that there's a period called genomic imprinting that occurs 3 months before the actual, so whatever egg the woman's going to ovulate that will become pregnant is getting programmed, the DNA is getting programmed 3 months before it drops from the ovary. So we have a 3 months before ovulation, and then we have a 9 to 10 month period inside the womb that's programming the DNA of this child.
So is the mother, she's doing it unconsciously, but you saying she can do it consciously.
She can do it consciously. And so, go ahead.
So unconsciously, what is she doing?
Well, let's compare an awakened person to an unawakened person. Exactly. Okay. So and in this terms, I made consciousness defined as, what do I feel like when I'm incredible? And this is how Isis explained to me. This is really getting into designing DNA. Is when let's pretend, whoever's listening, or you're at a yoga class and you're in a real sober moment. And I mean, of course, no drugs and drinking or anything, but you're just sober to reality. You're not in the past. You're not in the future. You just got out of yoga and you're looking at the trees, or maybe you're even on a hike. Let's pretend, even like if you're imagining you're on a hike in your favorite place in the woods. Okay. And when you're in that amplified space of feeling really, really awake. So the trees are going to be much greener. Yeah. The flowers are going to smell brighter. You're going to see the light.
Yeah.
All of your senses will be amplified. And so what we know as fertility is Mother Earth at its best. And that means Mother Earth is, she's lush. The water is running. The fires aren't taking over. So the fires aren't taking over. The floods aren't flooding our land. The wind isn't creating tornadoes all over. So when Mother Earth is super fertile and happy, her ecosystem is in balance, and this is all making sense?
Yes, it makes sense. I see like this, after the monsoon in India, everything starts to grow and blossom. I feel like it's like the peak of I feel like spring, something like in,
Right.
I see like this wave of new energy, like this.
Right. But we also don't want that to have to happen. And so let me try to make this super simple, is an awakened person has an amplified sensory system.
Yes.
And their elements inside are in balance. Those two things are basically happening within them. And so if we know we want to make somebody fertile and we know we want to program that baby's DNA in its best, is we have to get the woman to get back to the connection of Mother Earth. Mm-hmm. And so when she is about to program the cells, everything in her, and what we know from science is what we know from behavioral epigenetics, is that everything in her environment is programming her DNA and the cell's DNA of the baby she's going to create.
Right.
So, and that environment is an inner and outer experience. Okay. It's not just an outer experience, it's her inner world too. So when if you're feeling completely awake, imagine you're walking through nature and everything is just feeling beautiful. You can hear the birds singing. The smells are coming in. You can smell the roses. The water is running. You emulate nature at your fully awakened state in that sobriety.
Which reminds me of what, as a pregnant woman, all of our senses are heightened.
Right.
As a matter of fact, even after pregnancy, just as being a mother of small children, your senses are constantly heightened to hear screaming children, or where are they? Like, no, all that intuition, all those senses are at another level. So you're saying that this should be happening 3 months before minimum before even conceiving.
Yes, because that's what's going to create the DNA of the child. If you're trying to create a container that's fertile, and we're trying to get back to the Mother Nature's natural way, we want to emulate nature in any way, the best way we can, right? And so, as Isis explained, there's so much to this book, we could go on for hours, but I want people to leave with an idea that they are the genetic engineers of this child. And so the senses and the elements are what's critical to the consciousness of the child and flipping this DNA. So
the elements,
if you're trying to become, go ahead.
Elements that they're surrounded in. So the best place for me would be nature.
And that's one way to think about it. But in this book, I described it completely different. I described it. So let me go back to how the book is separated. So it's the body, and then the mind, and then the spirit. So in the body section of the book, I go over diet. So I go over everything they should eat and they should not eat. Okay. And detailed with scientific research. I go on about how to clear the genetics of the genetic line energetically. And I go into how the elements, affect our internal and external world. So I'm going to talk about that in just a second, but I want to lay out the book. The second section is a section on the mind, and how our mind is basically a movie theater that plays the movie that the baby will understand, or program the baby with their consciousness during their whole pregnancy. So I teach women that everything they think and they feel is playing a movie for the child. So I help them create a different kind of movie. I also go into the relationship. The triangle is also the connection to the relationship. So I talk about the hieros gamos. I talk about using light energy to conceive. And then in the spirit section, I talk about the elements affecting us from the outside. And then also how to connect back to God to find the beloved within, so you can find the beloved without. So that's a very shortened version of all this vast information. But I want to go into how important the elements are. And it's what you're kind of thinking, but it's even more. So when we begin to become awakened, and when we enter this spiritual path, at least for me, this is how I went through my awakening, is I went through the process of alchemy, of a complete transformation via the understanding the elements. So fire, the way that we turn into gold, I guess you would say, on earth, is we have to move through the elemental process. And it's an inside and it's an external experience. Mm-hmm. So it typically goes in this order. It goes from fire to water to air to earth to ether. And you can spend a certain amount of time within each element, and then you'll go through them again in order to refine yourself. And it happens internally and externally. It also happens to Mother Earth. So when Mother Earth is out of balance, more elements will become out of balance, creating infertility within Mother Earth. So we know we're at our most fertile is when all of those elements are balanced in our emotional, spiritual, and mental reactions. So fire, let's take the example of rape within a woman, and how rape can be a catalyst for our greatest spiritual expansion if we choose it to be. And that's a really sensitive subject, but I only use rape because 1 in 3 women have had some sort of sexual abuse or rape sometime in their life. So it's something that a lot of women can understand. And we can take the idea of rape and put trauma, drama, a boyfriend, anything that just replace this. So let's say something happens, like you're raped, you're sexually abused, your boyfriend cheats on you, fire occurs in your life. And what fire does, it's the element that begins to burn the ego up. It shatters your world. And it's the time when you're calling all your friends and you can't stop talking about it because you're in such a panic mode. It's the element that is the moment where you find out your husband cheated on you. It's the element that can make you move quickly out of your life, and it basically burns away the ego. Does this make sense as I'm speaking?
Yeah, no.
And then you can move into, so I was in the element of fire for 5 years because I had a lot of karma to burn off. And the element helps you to burn the generational history. It helps you move through stuff. It's the persona that melts away. So when the fire element hits your life, it burns from the inside, and you begin to release the ego, which is an identification with something outside of yourself, so you can become closer to spirit. Then, and oftentimes if you're trying to become pregnant, it's the process of even conceiving. It's the process of finding a partner that will help you, become a mother. It's that fire energy of, I want this so bad that I can't get it. It grinds at you. Yeah. So then water will happen, and water brings emotions. It brings sadness. It brings grief. It also is an intuitive element. So anything left over by the fire that's residual, the water has to come in to cool the fire element down in your life. And so water can be
it's also
letting go,
cleansing,
letting go. So it's often when people go into a period of needing space when they're in the water element. Oftentimes when you're pregnant, you're in the water element because you're actually full of water.
Right.
And so it's the dissolution of things. It's the moving. It's the giving away of items before you move. It's anything that separates it out. It's also the connection to the moon element. So if you become more intuitive or you need more self-reflection, you're in the water element. And then there's the air element. So anything that's not, so this is what we're doing as we're moving through these elements is we're becoming closer to God. And whether anyone who's listening, you're always in an element. You may not be aware of it. This goes back to who's awakened and who is unawakened. Those who know what element they are in and can understand, oh, I'm going through the wind element right now, I'm utilizing the earth element right now, will give them a better understanding of their awakening process and where they are in the alchemical transformation. So the wind moves you around. The wind you may get a new job, you may get a new career, you may get for me, I was in the wind element when I was traveling around Europe to different sites. The wind carries you up, picks you up to where you're really supposed to be. Is this all making sense?
Yes. So the wind kind of pushes you around to where you need to be.
Yeah.
But also keeps you kind of airy, doesn't it?
It does. And when not in balance, it can create a lot of anxiety. It can create a ton of fear. It can create a lot of anger. It can make you really frail and thin. And this also goes to Ayurvedic medicine. I mean, it can be amplified into, in my book, I just talk about your inner landscape and your, how it affects you from the outside, what the events may look like and how you may react to those events inside and how that programs the consciousness of the DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in the wind element, like an activist who fights for fighting the war, but it doesn't have a balanced groundedness to that, would be in the wind element.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who's angry and can't ground their energy would be in wind. Then we move to earth. And earth is often, when we're in the earth element, we come into balance. We create a home. It's a really good time to become pregnant because we begin to build things. We can, build blocks of things, or build a house, build a career, build a business.
Get more grounded.
Yeah. When not in balance, we can feel super heavy. We cannot be able to move. We can feel stuck in life. It often represents the clutter or the cleanliness of our own homes. And it also represents the alchemy of the male and the female coming together, or your opposing force. So when you're really able to go into balance with the male and female, you're probably going to be in the earth element, because it's the opposing forces that come together to build, to become one. And then ether element is the connection to the highest source. And it's when the ascended masters begin to speak to you. It's when you become a channel to bring divine guidance down to earth. And when it's out of balance, you may attract entities. You may have negative spirits attached to you that are bringing you down, right? There's two forces of the ether element. So if we understand that we're always moving through this alchemical transformation, and we know that each of these elements is related to a feeling, to an emotion, to an environment. We know that if we're in a certain element, we're going to program that child with that element.
I see.
Does this make sense?
So, question. Yes, it does.
Yeah.
So, is it possible to allow for yourself to move through the elements so that you get to an element where you want to be?
Yes. Of course, but God sometimes has different plans for you.
Absolutely.
So there's the internal knowing of, I'm in this element, and it sometimes can take you years to really understand how powerful alchemy is. And if you don't know anything about alchemy, you need to read the Emerald Tablet, and a good version is by David Hawk. It's not for, I guess, the people that have not just recent to this path. If you're on the path, you'll understand it. Fertile is probably the next book that will really help women that are just from any level understand the process of awakening. But let's say you're in the fire element and you're wanting to have a baby, or you're in the water element. You just have to recognize, okay, if your life's on fire and you're going crazy and your mind's going nuts, and when you're on fire is the burning of the Notre Dame. That's the beginning of the alchemical process. Fire is necessary for the transmutation of spirit. Yeah. So it's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just, I created and birthed both of my children in the fire element. Now, if I have a third child, I wouldn't be in that element. I would create a different type of a child, but those child came out spirited, tons of energy, almost couldn't even handle them. If you're programming your child while you're in the water element, you're going to have a child that's quite sad if you're not balanced. Water can be intuitive, but it can also be depressed.
Right.
You can drown yourself. So let's go back to the rape. The rape is the burn, the opening of the legs. The rape is the pain of the yoni, right? Yes. The water unbalanced of the woman who got raped is she may tell a lot of lies. She may, because she's drowning herself, she may become an alcoholic. Right. If that trauma isn't cleansed from her system, she'll pass that trauma and these unbalanced elements into the elemental makeup of the child. So I can go into more about how the sacred geometry creates and how this is all related to sacred geometry, which may help people understand the programming.
So Are you saying that the best place to be is to be in the etheric, in the ethers?
I don't know the best, and I don't think there is a best.
Yeah.
But I believe, from what I've understood, if we're trying to create this program with the Merkaba and the Star of Isis, if we're trying to flip the geometry to create a new type of DNA for this planet, it's a balance of all of these elements, which means that it's like let's go back to Mother Earth and balance. If she's in balance, she's not her fires will be natural. They won't be out of control. Her floods will not kill people. Her senses will be, I mean, if we want to make each woman just like Mother Earth in full fertility. And so all those things will be in balance in a normal form. Like, it's normal to have some fire come up in your life. It's normal to feel a little bit of wind, and it's normal to feel a little anxiety, but it's what makes it imbalanced is when it's constant. And what this constantness comes from, and what this constant imbalance comes from, is the programming from our childhood. So it comes from our subconscious mind, the 95% of us, the 95% of our lives that's being controlled by the past, and even controlled by this major programming that we're facing from the outside, with the government, and Absolutely. Which is a whole nother podcast, but but each of what we know by these shapes. So let's say that we want to create this enlightened child. So we know that each of these shapes is so the fire is represented by the triangle. So each of the shapes are found within the Metatron cube, the primary shapes. So let me go back. Let me go to how a cell replicates, and then tie it into the elements and tie it into the sacred geometry. So at the moment of conception, all of the senses of mostly the woman, but a little bit of the man, as the sperm meets the egg, that's the moment of conception. I don't believe that's when the soul comes down, but that's the moment of conception. So whatever frequency you're at that moment of conception is the base frequency of the child you will create in your womb. You and you can change that frequency, and you can amplify that frequency throughout pregnancy, but that's the base frequency. So then the sacred geometry begins. And this is also seen in the clinic where I work. So I work in a clinic, and I get to work with DNA all day long. I get to see pronuclei. I get to see the cells in the embryos form. I get to help women choose their embryos with the doctors. So
amazing that it's connecting for you.
Yeah, it connects it all, but they don't know what all these other things I do on the side, but I don't talk about it. But so at the moment of conception, when 23, at this moment of Earth, right now, 23 chromosomes from the male and 23 chromosomes from the female will come together, and within the embryo, they'll create a pronuclei. And that pronuclei is the shape of the Vesica Pisces. And it's two little, it just says, okay, this embryo has been, this egg is now an embryo. And there's 23 and 23. The 23 chromosomes from the sperm and the 23 chromosomes from the egg meet, and they fertilize. The two pronuclei will appear within the embryo. And from those pronuclei, the flower of life will begin to grow on that original embryo. Okay. And that's where the senses come in. So that's where the sight, smell, sound. What are the other ones?
The senses, sight,
sight, smell. I'm forgetting right now. I've been talking so much. But yeah, the five senses come into play right at that embryo. Then the embryo begins to separate. Within that original embryo, we can imagine that original embryo is the flower of life and its consciousness. And at that moment of conception, the five senses are what programs that baby immediately. So because we know if we're coming from these higher dimensions, we're going to come into an embryo, and the way we even know we're on Earth is the five senses. We have to have those five senses in order to function. That's how we have awareness on this planet.
Yeah.
Right? And so our mother, so whatever your smell is like, whatever your sound current is at that moment, whatever the site of the energy that's going through the room. So some energy may be electric, some energy may be magnetic, and some energy may have a color. All of that matters. And I have a great meditation from Fertile that will help women really understand their frequency at conception.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What about touch? Touch from the
touch would be,
father.
What does it feel like? So, and imagine you're lying on a bed right now and an energy would come through the room. I could take people, it would be another podcast, but take people through what this feels like. But what is the baby you'd attract right now? And a woman will know immediately. And I have found that some energy will be clear, some energy will be cloudy. And what would it feel like if you could touch it? And they know intuitively when I take them through this meditation, which I don't have time in this particular podcast to do, but it's an intuitive knowing. And so, for example, if somebody sees a red electric energy coming in, I know that their frequency isn't going to necessarily hold the child, because an electric energy, like the tips of fire, let's say the tips of fire, that would be a woman who may lose a child, because you want a magnetic womb to hold that child. You want that frequency to be strong to hold. And obviously there's chromosome abnormalities right in the beginning. So we just want the chromosome to be like a magnetically held earthbound structure, right?
So yes, I'm getting all of this. And so what I'm feeling is that this could even possibly happen on its own without an actual seed from the father, where you can actually have immaculate conception.
Yes, you can absolutely have immaculate conception. Yes. You just have to remember how. Immaculate conception is done through light and energy.
Yes. So
there's so much in this book. Right now I'm trying to get the basics. We'd have to do another whole show.
Yeah, I think we need another show.
Yeah. But back to the embryo, so people understand how it connects to the sacred geometry and to the elements. So then the embryo begins, so you have that original embryo, and whatever the consciousness of that embryo where the sperm met the egg is the base consciousness of that child. It's also as those cells replicate, they will create that consciousness over and over and over and over again. So that base frequency is what is dividing within the cells. And so as these cells gets to 8, so as the embryo replicates, and there's 8 cells, this is called the egg of life. And it's represented by something called the Metatron cube. And so Isis took me up until this point, and she explained to me how the senses are created. She explained to me how conception happens. She explained to me how consciousness is created from the void within the womb. And then she led me to books where some other people had picked up on some similar information. She gave me more, but then she led me to the Flower of Life books. And in the Flower of Life books, he had a lot of the same information that she had provided me, but a little bit more. And what he explained, Drunvalo, in the Flower of Life books, is that the egg of life, which is 8 cells, which in reproductive medicine is known as day 3 of, it's actually 8 cells are found within the Petri dish on day 3 and within your womb. So in that within the Metatron cube, which is the same shape as the 8 cells, are held all the Platonic solids. So the Platonic solids are the isodecahedron, the dodecahedron, the square, like basically all the shapes we've been talking about, square, circle, triangle. All of these are related to the elements. So fire, earth, air, water, and ether. So whatever, and this basic shape on day 3 of conception is what creates the energetics of the child. So having the elements in balance by this day specifically is vital. And what the human race is missing right now is we just get pregnant randomly. We don't plan it. Most women are drunk. They go to dinner. Like, let's say you get pregnant, you don't know what day it is. you didn't plan it. You have done no work on yourself. You have not prepared your body. You have not created a vessel. You're not eating the right food. You're not drinking enough water. Your thoughts are out of balance. Your elements are out of balance. Your life is out of balance.
Yes.
And so you're creating imbalanced children. And then you're not prepared to consciously program that child during the pregnancy. You're going to only create this subconscious programming from the genetics that you grew up in. So what I teach with the Mystical Motherhood series and this book Fertile is that we have to start to prepare for pregnancy long before we have the baby, and that's conscious conception. And so I provide exactly how to do this and exactly the importance of it and exactly why we need to do it to change the human race. And even if you don't do it to the point where you're balanced like an ether element up to ether and you're connected to the ascended masters, I mean, I'm not saying that's it. You still have to have all these other elements in balance, and you have to have your senses amplified. You have to have your diet in order. You have to have your thoughts, like created to the mind of God. You have to be connected to spirit. Those are just doing better is better than where we were. And so that's what I teach. And that's why women come to me in private sessions and in group sessions and to prepare for this. And if they're challenged with fertility, somehow it works.
It's amazing.
And
honestly, I can't wait to read this book.
Yeah, it's really good. And as your friend, it's like, I was like, whoa, this is good. This is really nice.
It's funny because I'm also writing a book, and it's also coming through me in that way. But, Chelsea, even though this information is coming through you, I feel like you were also heralding this kind of information in the past. It doesn't come through for no reason.
I was activating past lifetimes that I had. And by visiting these lands and traveling to these lands, I activated those memories within me. It's like that millennial game where they go and pick up the Pokemon.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I was going around Europe like Pokemoning. Is that a word? I verbed it.
I think
and I would literally, I was sitting in France and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And I was sitting at a cafe and I was like, I'm just waiting for something. And I'm waiting on a miracle. And then the miracle came. And so what my goal is to get this theory into the education system, because I made it as spiritual as this sounds to you. I made the book capable of being read by a doctor too.
Wow.
So I made it so that, I backed it up with scientific research, and I showed that, that DNA is, what science has shown with behavioral epigenetics. And then I made it really easy for any woman to read. And it's for anyone to read at all. I just focused what this book's about it's just about improving consciousness and having the children, but it can be used for anybody.
Yeah, which is amazing, because I have to, tip my hat off to you, because right now there's a huge gap between science and spirituality, and although it's also merging. Mm-hmm. So I feel like you're a pioneer of that, of merging the two levels of awareness, or
the first section of the book is called Merging Science and Spirit.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Do you have any questions about the land or about anything at all?
Well, what I feel is that is this now like a new way of creating conscious children? So are you also creating the mother to be a conscious inner child, or is it just the conscious child?
It's all about the mother. None of this is about the child.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it sounds like it's about the child, but so a lot of women come to me and they say, I want to have a baby, or so in all my backgrounds, I worked as a labor and delivery nurse, and I practiced family medicine. I worked in family clinics, training in family clinics. And then I now work in reproductive medicine. So I kind of I've seen the whole way of how children can come in. And there was a lot of information or a lot of debate on, natural birthing versus C-sections versus and now there's a lot of issues around IVF, IUI, and having, natural conception. So a lot of women who tend to find me are having trouble with fertility because the infertility, that brings a crisis. It creates the fire.
Right.
And then that fire is what really makes them go within and like, why can't I get pregnant? And they're like, well, there's an imbalance.
Yeah.
And typically when we get so what I do is Isis guides me to show them what is really going on with them. And a lot of times it's nutrition. It's a simple thing. And sometimes it's their BMI. I don't even have to see their face, but I can say your BMI is too small for, it's okay to have a small BMI if you're naturally have a small BMI, but if you're taking away food, sometimes people have to gain weight. Some women have to lose weight. A lot of times it's issues around control that cause problems with infertility that I've seen. So the way that we are programmed as a child is how we're going to mother our own child when the baby comes out. And so I don't necessarily care how the woman gets pregnant. I'm not trying to say that this method is going to create natural fertility or, help them get pregnant naturally, though it has that side effect.
Yeah.
Because when they lose the density, what I'm doing is I'm helping them release the density through this alchemical process of releasing these subconscious traumas and patterns.
Yeah.
And that has an ultimate effect of just creating more lightness and fertility within them. But even if they go to IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, or they have a baby through in IUI, which is insemination, that's okay because that's where science is heading. And as women get older, they may be doing that. But we have to remember that it's the mother that counts, not it's the mother that's going to create this child. And so the more you can mother yourself, the more that you've mothered all the little girls in the past that have been hurting and traumatized and in pain. And even if you had a wonderful childhood and you're listening, there's a lot of trauma in you. And we can always find it in the ways you want to control things and the ways that you may have issues coming up in your life. And they're just mirroring your consciousness. And so I teach women how to, amplify their relationships or how to change every situation in their life to create this balanced effect that ultimately.
Well, some people, it's funny because some people actually believe that they had like this perfect childhood. And then later in life, they say there's something not right. Ooh, there's a very bad connection. Okay, we're back. Can you hear me? No. Okay, back. Can you hear me?
Got it?
Yeah, I have to go in like 10 minutes.
Okay.
Right. So what I was saying was that a lot of people, they believe that they have like this perfect childhood, and then later in life they're starting to realize that they have a lot of anger issues or fears or anxiety, and then trace it back to their childhood.
Yeah.
I feel like people that are listening, that they're like, oh, I don't have, I have a pretty good childhood. So I think everybody has some sort of, if it's not trauma, it's conditioning also from the parents.
Everyone's conditioned.
Yes.
And I promise you, if I do a session with you, I will find your conditioning.
Yeah.
And it's until we're lifted out of conditioning, which I recently was, very painful. But I obviously have more conditioning and always more to lose, always more density to lose. But we don't know we're in conditioning, and we don't know how much we are unconsciously suffering until that is the awakening process. And all of us are suffering, but we're unconscious of it. And it's through the ways we keep repeating the same mistakes over and over and not even realizing that we're unhappy in them.
Yes.
Yeah. And a lot of times when women are trying to become a mother, and I work with women that, are trying to become pregnant, or they are pregnant, or they're on their third baby. It doesn't matter where they are. It could be problems with breastfeeding. It could be anything. It's something. I can work with everyone. It just tends to be that mothers come to me, but we just work through those issues. And I use a lot of Kundalini Yoga when necessary. That helps them to maintain their practice and balance the elements later. And as they move, if they're not with me, I know that they're doing the work.
Right. Well, breath work is also, helps move those elements. Right?
Yes.
The fire, the wind, all that.
Right. And I was so innocent to this process that I hadn't even thought till after I read the book, oh, well, this is why people go to acupuncture. Yeah. I hadn't even that was how innocent as I was writing the book, is that, of course, if your elements are balanced, you're going to create fertility.
Yes.
And so what this book does, what Fertile does, and if anyone's listening, you can go to mysticalmotherhood.com for more information. But what this process does, the process that I work with women, is that it just helps you become a better person. And so that you don't pass this genetic information on to your next child, and you create a new type of DNA for this planet. And so everyone who comes to me, I know that they're going to do it differently than their parents. And it comes down to as simple as that. They're not going to do it the same as the way that they were raised, because their consciousness is not the same as their parents. And so their children's isn't either going to be either. Right. And so if you're connected to the Magdalene and you're connected to this rose line, there's much deeper information I can provide about flipping the pentagram, about creating the rose, about utilizing light and harmonics, and about amplifying specific senses to create that it's like, if you want to leave with an information, is if you're about to have a baby, what do you want to create? What kind of child do you want to create? So you can program this child however you want, whatever type of movie you want during pregnancy. And so, which is another podcast, but it would be, what kind of child do you want to create? Let's make that movie.
Amazing. So my feeling is that this book is also a book that you pass down to generation.
It is. That's what I was told. Somebody told me this will be a book you pass down from generation to generation. Beautiful. So I pray it reaches a lot of people, and it was just offered, it'll be available in June 2019. And anybody who wants to get a hold of me can write me at www.mysticalmotherhood.com.
Okay. And do you have an email address?
Yes, mysticalmotherhood@gmail.com. Mm-hmm. And you can find that on the website. And you can also find me on Facebook at Mystical Motherhood, and on Instagram at Mystical Motherhood, and write me there.
Great. Are you planning on selling it on Amazon?
Yes, it'll be available on Amazon in summer of 2019. And it's a coffee table book, and it's 20 illustrated drawings of the embryo and how consciousness is created with the shape, so that you can really understand these elements and how to balance them, and how the senses are created, and how to, and I also go into the hieroskamos, and how that, which is bringing down light while making love with your partner, so that you can really amplify the DNA.
I can't wait to get my hands on this book. So excited for you. And I'm so excited for every woman that will allow herself to be gifted with this information.
Yeah. Do you have any more questions before we end?
No, but I want to continue the conversation another time.
Okay.
I have to pick up my daughter, and I know soon maybe you have 2 little girls, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
And you said yourself that you were in different time, but you plan on having another child. I also would like to have another child, so this book would be a true gift.
Yeah, you'll love this book.
Thank you so much, sister.
You're welcome.
I love you. And I will have all the information down below in the YouTube, on the YouTube information box. And if you want to reach out to Chelsea, just go to her website. You want to say it again, Chelsea?
Yes, mysticalmotherhood.com.
And just stay tuned for her new book called Fertile.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chelsea.
You're welcome.